Jeffrey Deskovic, Esquire, he's a fabulous attorney, is an internationally recognized wrongful conviction expert and founder of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which has freed, as of today, 11 wrongfully convicted people and helped pass 3 laws aimed at preventing wrongful conviction. An advisory board member of the coalition group, It Could Happen to You, which has passed 6 laws. Jeff also serves on the Global Advisory Council for Restorative Justice International. His motivation is that he served 16 years in prison from age 17 to 32 for murder and rape before he was exonerated by DNA testing. Jeffrey, how are you today?
Wonderful. I feel great. Thanks for having me on here, D.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I learned about Jeffrey from Sean Murphy, who is the host of the Above the Bar podcast. And Sean is also a fellow military veteran, just like I am. And so when I heard about what had happened, Jeffrey, me having been to jail a bunch of times for shit I actually did do, you know,
You were rightfully convicted. You were rightfully convicted then.
well, one time, no, the other 3 times, maybe, just depends on how you want to look at it. But I had and we were gonna talk about some of that, but mainly you. But, going through the criminal justice system is an eye-opening experience, whether you're right or wrong or kind of in between. And so you learn a whole lot. No documentary, no amount of watching Law and Order and Cops and Murder, She Wrote, or anything like that is the same as when you have those damn handcuffs on you and they slam that damn door and then you don't come outside into the sun or the light or the wind or the moon or nothing for however time. Okay, nothing can take the place of that feeling. It's just terrible and treacherous. So an individual by the name, I hope I'm saying this right, Jaya Words,
Gia works. Yes.
Gia Words, created a documentary, which the link will be included in the showy notes, as everything always is, about Jeffrey's experience, and it's called Conviction. And this came out in 2020. I watched it on Amazon, and I will include the Amazon link in the show notes. So many of us know somebody who's gone to jail, or a lot of us have been to jail. Sometimes we've done the shit, sometimes we haven't done the shit. In your own words, Jeffrey, tell us who you are and again, just whatever you'd like to say about yourself.
Well, I'm an attorney who's an advocate whose life is dedicated to freeing people that are wrongfully imprisoned in the same position which I was, and with a equal concern at preventing what happened to me from other happening to other people. Hence, doing the policy work. But as you mentioned, my motivation is that I did spend 16 years in prison from, being arrested at 16, turning 17 by the time the trial rolled around, and being wrongfully imprisoned from age 17 to 32. So the year is 1990. We're in Peekskill, which is in Westchester County, New York. So it's the suburbs. Population is approximately 25,000 people. Murders were pretty rare there. So when this murder happened, it created this atmosphere of fear, rumor, paranoia. Parents were concerned with their own safety and safety of their children. I was quiet unto myself in high school. Some of the kids told the police they might want to speak to me because I guess their thought was whoever's quiet unto themselves commit heinous crimes. And so that's how I got on the police radar. And from there, reinforcing factors, I was a sensitive teenager. I had an emotional reaction to the death of a classmate, and the cops thought that that was suspicious also. And then they got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which claimed to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator. So, reinforcing factor. So, for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they talk to me like I'm a suspect. And when they push too hard and I become frightened and I want to get away from them, they switch it up. And Jeff, as this junior detective helper theme was developed. And so kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinion was correct. I began to look at the officer who was pretending to be my friend as like a father figure. And then plus before I was a teenager, the career I fantasized about having was to be a cop when I grew up. And so I think somehow or another the cops learned that, and that was how they developed that whole theme. So eventually they got me to agree to take a lie detector test. So I went to the police station for the test on a school day. So my mother and grandmother thought I was in school. They didn't call around looking for me. They drove me across county lines 40 minutes away from taking me from Peekskill to Brewster, which is in Putnam County. Now I'm dependent on the police. I have no idea of where I am or no independent way of getting back. I don't understand this 4-page brochure that they've explained about how the polygraph works, but I figured, well, I'm there to help the police. So what does it matter? Let's just get on with it. From there, the polygraphist, who was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, but he's dressed like a civilian. He never identifies himself as law enforcement. He never reads my rights. He gives me countless cups of coffee to get me nervous, and then he launches into his third-degree tactics. So raises his voice at me. He invades my personal space. He's asking me same questions over and over again. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. And eventually he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." And when he said that to me, that really shot my fear through the roof. And then the cop, pretending to be my friend, comes in the room and says, "Look, they're going to harm you. I've been holding them off. I can't do that any longer. You have to help yourself. Look, just tell them what they want to hear. You go home. You're not going to be arrested." So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, I was only concerned with my own safety in the moment. And I was desperate to get out of there. So I made up a story based on the information they gave me, the course, the interrogation that day, and 6 weeks run up to it. By the time it was said and done, I had collapsed on the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Obviously, I was arrested. So that was that part of it. I mean, the DNA didn't match me before the trial, but then the prosecutor got the medical examiner commit fraud, and he claimed that he remembered that he forgot to show to document medical evidence, which he said showed the victim was promiscuous. So that allowed the prosecutor to argue, well, that's how the DNA doesn't match you, but yet you're still guilty. He mentioned someone by name that he claimed had slept with the victim. He never had a DNA test result from that person. He never called him as a witness. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury. And my lawyer essentially didn't defend me. He didn't call my alibi. He didn't question the medical examiner. He didn't explain to the jury what the DNA not matching me meant. He didn't use that to challenge the confession. And he should have never represented me because the other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of the Legal Aid Society. So that prevented us from asking him for a test, for us from calling him as a witness. And the end result was I was found guilty. I was given a 15 to life sentence. And, I ultimately served 16 years in prison. I lost 7 appeals. I got turned down for parole because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility. And ultimately, I was exonerated, like you said, through further DNA testing through the data bank, which identified the actual perpetrator whose DNA was there because he killed the second victim 3.5 years later. So my charges were dismissed on actual innocence grounds, and he was arrested and convicted. And so that's the story. I mean, I kind of found a purpose in life doing this work. So
Okay. Thank you for that breakdown. I'm sorry you went through all of that, but I'm happy that you've taken what happened to you and now you're using it to help other people. So, so I'm going to go back and walk back through some of this. So this is in Peekskill. Tell us like what state this is so we can get like a geographical frame of reference.
it's New York State, and it's the suburbs. It's about maybe 50 minutes from Manhattan, north.
All right. And so like Jeffrey said, this is 1990. The victim in question, her name was Angela Correa.
Correa.
Correa, and she was slain on November 15th, 1989. And then so do you think that your attorney, the one who really sucked, was maybe bought off or somehow in on this plot to get you convicted for this?
Yeah, I think, but can't prove that, I think that he was cooperating with them. I mean, at that time, a lot of people were going back and forth from the DA's office to legal aid and from legal aid to the DA's office. So he might have been angling for that. Sure, that thought has crossed my mind because I've met a lot of lawyers since I've been home, and they all wondered, like, who represented me at the trial. And when I mentioned it, his name, they're all rather surprised because he has a reputation of being a good lawyer. They've tried cases against him, and they can't believe he turned in that performance.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really like fucked up the way that the police like zone in on people like that. And at that point, their jobs go from being professional to for the better of society. And it's like they get so personal, you know, it's like they take it personal what they believe that you have done. So to hone in on a teenager like that, clearly they were under pressure from society to find somebody to arrest. Okay. It's super fucked up that they thought you, I guess, like an emo kid, like most teenagers are fairly emotional, and maybe you had some anxiety or whatever going on. And we understand a lot more about mental health now than we did back then. But the rottenness that prevails inside police departments hasn't changed. I think they take their power for granted. And, and I mean, the way that they handled you like that, they lied.
Right.
you know, And it never ceases to amaze me the way police feel like any kind of ends can the ends are going to justify the means with them. It doesn't matter if they lie, tell the truth, finagle this or that or whatever. My first arrest when I had like this 8 ball of crystal meth like in my underwear. They used like some informant to set up like the drug deal, but then the cops followed me. I took like a right at a light up to the side of an elementary school, and they like literally took my pants and underwear down and dug around under my nutsack to find this dope in the middle of the day.
Jeez,
On
Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ, the Holy Ghost, everybody. So come on. And now we're on the side of an elementary school in the middle of the day when the kids are out playing. Now, and on the police report, they lied and said I took a left turn at the right, and that I think they found the 8 ball, like I don't know, in the car, like it was laying on the dashboard. Not true. And somehow the grand jury was able to put two and two together and figure that they had lied, and it was thrown out. But cops do not mind it going one way and then saying whatever the fuck they want to on those police reports.
Right, exactly. Well, see, piggybacking and building off of that point, that's what happened to me though, because in their police reports regarding the confession, because this was not videotaped, it wasn't audio taped, there's no signed confession, it's just the cop's word.
Oh,
So
Lord.
so you see where I'm about to go with this, right? You see where I'm about to go with this? In their police report, they left the threat and false promise out of their report and obviously out of their testimony in the courtroom.
See, that's some bullshit right there. Their word only, they set you up. And they just needed a fall guy. And it's so fucked up because the person who actually did this is black. You're
Right, right,
Czechoslovakian. You're
right.
Czechoslovakian. Like, y'all couldn't look more different.
If you wanted to, right?
Right?
But plus the age and building off that, the age at the time of the crime, the actual perpetrator was 29. I'm like 16 and the victim's 15. So it's not just different race, but like the age disparity is huge as well.
Lies, scandals, and deceptions. I have no oh my god, I used to wanna be a cop too, like you said you wanted to be a cop. There was a time I had applied for the Houston Police Department, and I was going through the fitness exams and everything, and the only reason I didn't go down that path was because the city council that year had voted to decrease the cop salary from, like, 50K down to 30K, and I was already making that where I was, so I was like, "Why go risk getting shot up for, like, the same, if not less money?" And now I would never ever want to be a police officer. I'm so thankful I didn't become one. And and so I wonder how did this experience with the police change your desire to be a to be a cop?
Well, in my teenage years, I had went from being wanting before I was arrested, I went from being wanting to be a cop to wanting to be an attorney because my mother had a personal injury lawyer, and I met him a couple of times, and he he was, he was well dressed, the whole suit attache case thing, and he appeared to be well respected and well compensated. So, I mean, I changed that idea before this experience, but in terms of how I view the police now, like, look, I don't go with a broad brush. I don't think all the cops are bad, but I also don't think they're all good. Okay. And I categorically reject the rhetoric from apologists or even some police themselves. I categorically reject the idea that it's just a few bad apples. No, it's a hell of a lot more than that, because if it wasn't, we wouldn't have more than 3,000 exonerations across the country from 1989 forward. We wouldn't have the police brutality. We wouldn't have the unjustifiable deadly police shootings, and almost more importantly, we would have everybody looking the other way. So no, it's not a few bad apples. It's a hell of a lot more than that. At the same time, it's not all of them either. I mean, I don't think there's anything sacred about being an officer, in the sense that I don't think that anyone in the career is automatically a good person. I think there's good and bad in the profession. I mean, I think it takes one hell of a set to be a cop, because it is a very dangerous job. They do risk a lot to protect us, but at the same time, too many abuse and too many look the other way. I wish the honest cops, this phrase, if you see something, say something. I wish the honest cops would blow the whistle and say something and force the corrupt ones out of their profession. But it hasn't happened to this point. I don't think it's ever going to happen. But I'm not going to quit calling for it either.
And I don't blame you, man. Just, nobody's in every profession for the right reason. I mean, you have priests, fucking altar boys, you got, cops doing the sort of shit they did to you. I mean, I don't know if people even enter their professions with like the best intentions all the time. Some people I think start with the right intentions and they get corrupt along the way. It's all over the place. But I mean, for those police to do what they did to you, to look in your face and lie. I read in the article that you sent me, which is also going to go in the show notes, how I think there was 3 wakes for this girl, and you attended all of them, and you were emotional at all of them, and the cops thought that because you were emotional that that was a sign of guilt, which is what you stated earlier. But a teenager, any teenager at a funeral for a classmate, if they're not crying, or if they are crying, everybody expresses their emotions differently. But the fact that they were willing to, like, follow you around like this is just like, and then look in your face and lie, you have to have, like, a dark soul or none at all to look at a 15-year-old kid and lie, for as long as they did to you, because this was a few months that they were toying around with you. And so, when police get on the news or I read these articles these days when they're crying about how their power is being taken from them, like, so now they can be arrested, now they can be, you know, when they go out and kill people and stuff, they can actually get in trouble. Or in certain cities and states, they cannot arrest people for a simple drug possession. And they're crying because their power is being taken from them. I'm like, well, you've abused it, so you don't get to keep it.
Right. Right.
So I want to talk about, let me see. I took quite a bit of notes on this one here. So when you got to prison, your reputation, you found, like, had already been, like, tarnished in a way. How talk to me about that.
Yeah, there's a vigilante mentality in prison towards people who have been convicted of sex offenses. So, unfortunately, there was a rape along with the murder, and so, I had this bullseye on my back. I had this target on my back, and I was always in fear that people would discover what I was incarcerated for. That could lead to other problems. And there was several times in the course of my incarceration, I was beat up. One time, I nearly lost my life. So that was that aspect of it. But that animosity wasn't limited just to the prisoners. I mean, even some of the guards also, adopted that. So, prison was a dangerous place. I mean, I don't want to overstate it. I mean, to the extent that you even can. I mean, it's not like every other day I was, getting my rear end kicked. It wasn't like frequent like that way. But in the course of 16 years, it was maybe like 7 or 8 times. So, it's your world D, however you want to consider that a lot or not. guess it's up to the listener.
But how do you think they I mean, this probably was highly televised, but do you think any of the ruining of your reputation was intentional by anybody?
You mean in the prison? You're saying even just being arrested during the case on the street, or both?
Like
What do
the
you?
fact that by the time you got there or shortly after arriving,
Mhm.
many people knew the interpretation.
Yeah, right. Well, I think that it was a highly publicized case for sure, and every time I went made a court appearance, it was a major media movement, with the coverage being like guilt presumptive orientated. So, I think that was intentional, but that's like, the media try to make something salacious. I mean, I don't think I was ever really afforded a presumption of innocence in terms of the court of the public opinion, and not really so much how the actual court worked either. I mean, they claim it's the other way around, but it's really not. But I definitely think that the publicity of the case preceded me into the prison, and then there were people that facilitated that, whether on the guard and the correctional officers or even other prisoners spreading it. I mean, certainly that all that stuff took place.
Okay. So you tried to appeal this for I think around like 5 years, and a name came up. It was like Janine Shapiro.
Janine Pirro, yeah. Well, I did the appeals were like 11 years. I lost 11 appeals. So Janine Pirro was the district attorney of Westchester. So she was not the DA when I was convicted. And she always points that out. But she was the DA before my first appeal was decided. So it was her office that fought me in 7 appeals. It was her office who blocked me from getting further DNA testing several times. It was her office that got me thrown out of federal court. My attorney was given the wrong information on the filing procedure from the court clerk. And so that resulted in my legal documents being filed 4 days too late. And it was Janine Pirro's office that urged the court, look, he's late. Just get rid of his case that way. And that's what they did. And then I challenged that ruling in 3 more appeals unsuccessfully. And so she plays a moral role there, you know, even though she would rather not. But she does a lot of commentary on Fox and just had a few judge shows. And to hear her tell it now, I mean, she's all about due process and presumption of innocence. And well, where was all of that when you were the DA and I was wrongfully imprisoned? I mean, that was the time we needed you to say and do everything then. But so I experienced something different. And she's never apologized for her role either.
What a cunt. So, and I read where because I'd seen that face on television before, and when I came across that name, I was like, "Oh, wow, that really brought home to me just how huge like your case was." But it was like she wouldn't rerun the DNA with what I read.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what would it have hurt to just test it? Something like that makes it seem like she was polarized against you. They're already spending all kinds of money. They have a budget, so it's not like they can say, well, it would have cost too much. So
Right, 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 right.
what's the damn reason for not just checking again?
Yeah, she never they never articulated any kind of explanation on that made any sense. I mean, I remember I got a piece of correspondence once from her office on that issue, and they said that the DNA issue was already in front of the jury, which convicted you, and in front of the appellate court, which affirmed the conviction. Which really wasn't an answer because when I was asking for the DNA to be rerun, this was in 1997, 98, the DNA database had been created and it hadn't been created before. So the DNA technology at the time of my trial was RFLP technology. So they would just compare a particular item to a suspect, like a one-to-one testing. The database would allow you to take one article and run it through the database and see if it matches anyone else on file. So the technology was improved. So they should have just run it again, as you said.
Okay, Speak. I want you to really make us feel, do your best to make us feel how you felt. So you're a sophomore in high school when this is happening. So, there's no prom, you know, for you. You know, I don't the looking forward to I don't like to use the term losing your virginity because I don't feel like it's a loss. I feel like it's a transition into adulthood. But the normal stuff teenagers think about, when am I gonna have sex for the first time? When am I gonna go to college, prom, senior trip, all of that. At what point did you realize for sure when you were behind bars, this ain't gonna happen for me? I'm not gonna be able to live in my 20s out, to do all of this. Speak to us about that dark day.
Well, it was only at the end. I mean, throughout the whole incarceration period, I thought I was just doing a year or two to the next court proceeding. The next appeal would be decided, which I was sure I was going to win because I was innocent and I still naively believed in the system. And every time I would lose, I would just refocus on the next appeal. So it was only 15 years in where my appeals were over after 11 years. Then I wrote letters for 4 years looking for someone to take my case for free because they don't give you a lawyer anymore once your appeals are over. And the only way back in a court when the appeals are over is if you can find some new evidence that would have made a difference. So after all the appeals were over, then I wrote letters for 4 years and rarely got responses. And then I went to the parole board and then they said no also. So now I got 15 years in. And by that point, I'm like 32. So that's when I started thinking, well, I guess I'm gonna die in here. I'm gonna die as in prison for a crime I didn't commit.
While you were in there, when you were, still in your teens, did you think about those things like not graduating high school and missing prom and all of that? How was that emotion for you?
Yeah, I did think about that. That was all very difficult emotionally, just to crystallize, like you said. I didn't graduate high school. I didn't go to the prom. I missed births, deaths, weddings, holidays, right? Even various rites of passage from not getting a driver's license to, not having your own first place or, going shopping or writing a check, finishing my education at a more traditional age and being well into a career, possibly on the way to, financial freedom. All that stuff dawned on me and it was hard emotionally. I mean, I had to keep fighting off feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, feelings of one thinking about giving up, suicidal ideation. So all of those things were things I had to fight off too.
Did people come to visit you?
So for most intents and purposes, I did the time by myself. My mother used to come, but then the last 6 years, like I saw her like once every 6 months if I was lucky. I had a couple sets of aunts and uncles that would come, but then they would visit and then disappear for 3 years and visit and disappear for 3 years and just have that continue. My brother came 3 times in 16 years, but not at all in the last decade. And that was it on the family end of it. On the I mean, one friend came up one time and another person came up 4 or 5 times, and I lost track of them after 5 years, and that was it. So while not literally, for most intents and purposes, I did the time on my own, and that made it more difficult.
Did did they put money on your books? Did they write letters?
My mother used to put money on the books, but again, not in the last 5 or 6 years, rarely did she put anything, and, certainly none of the other people were putting money on the books either. So the last 5 or 6 years, I kinda had to, like, live off the land. I mean, I went to work in a mess hall and, I was hustling there. People want different items, and so you steal different items and you sell it and you'll give me a deodorant, I'll take a toothpaste for this and, but that is a really good point because I mean, the food in prison was terrible. I mean, sometimes it was burned, other times it wasn't fully cooked. I mean, I remember the same food items would make their way on the menu 3 or 4 times a week before its grand finale on Sunday in a soup where they would just dump everything that had been already used like 4 times, whatever's left over into this. big container, and they just would dump water on it and heat it up, and that was the soup. So that I remember. So there was that, but I remember also, not to bog down on too many of these details, but I remember it was two pieces of bologna, one piece of change on a cheese on an old hot dog bun with a small 25-cent bag of chips that was mostly full of air, and there would be like a quarter of a slice of peach. And that was Sunday dinner. We'll put air quotes around that.
No,
So the food was terrible, man.
I'm here for all the details. I appreciate it.
Okay. All
Uh,
right.
so I mean, it was no different when I was in jail. Like jails are not known for, it's not like they got 5 stars, on the food and everything. It's all pretty much like slop.
Yeah. Right. No, it is. It is. And look, and just to be clear, right? I'm not advocating or complaining that this wasn't gourmet food, but what I'm saying is the food was terrible, and to me it didn't meet bare minimum standards of human decency. That's the main point I'm trying to make in terms of that. My grandmother used to come to see me all the time with my mother, but unfortunately she passed away in 1996, so that would have been 5 years in, 5 or 6 years in. So she stopped coming to see me as a result of not being alive.
Well, she had a good reason. She had a good
Right, right, right. Yeah, clearly.
So do you think your family believed that you were guilty?
So I had a uncle that was actually in law enforcement in Yonkers, which was elsewhere in Westchester County, New York. So he was a marshal as a law enforcement position. So he he thought I was guilty. He went and talked to the cops, and they I guess they convinced him cop to cop that I was guilty. And his daughter, who was extremely conservative, so he convinced her. So those two thought I was guilty, but everybody else thought that everyone else thought I was innocent. But the thing is that their belief in my innocence did not translate into them maintaining contact with me. And, there was several times my mother made rounds amongst the family and, look, we got to get a lawyer, and, maybe everybody could do a manageable amount, but nobody wanted to throw in anything. So their belief in my innocence never translated into anybody helping me. And so, when I have periodically visited and seen people, my extended family during my 16 years of freedom now, they're at one time or another, most people have, expressed an apology, and there's, some feelings of guilt there, on their end of it.
Shit, I'll tell you, man, like, from my experience going to jail, your blood family, they're 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 gonna be the last ones to show up.
Right.
Like my friends came first, not my blood family.
Right, right,
But being arrested in high school, like your friends, whatever friends you had were like just in high school. It's not like they could have really financially done much,
right, of
for
course.
you. So you didn't have that, but I don't know what it is, but I feel like it's a sense of judgment that comes from the blood family when we get arrested. I really, really do. At least that was my experience. But in the case of arrest, y'all don't wait on your blood family. You better have that money saved up with your friends somewhere because they're gonna be the ones to come first. So
Right,
so you spoke a lot in the documentary about how the healthcare behind bars, and in particularly you had a you compared to this whole like hospice situation to like mobsters. You like leaving people that are dying, not letting them out because they were already gonna die, so they're on hospice, and you're not letting them out anyway. So talk to me about how the healthcare situation and this whole hospice and the compassionate release being delayed.
right. So the healthcare in prison was terrible in general. I mean, I remember in Elmira, which is where I spent 13 and a half of the 16 years. So it would be like a month, sometimes several, before you could see a doctor. You would always see a nurse, and the nurse's answer to everything was, give you a couple of Tylenols and come back tomorrow if you still don't feel well. And it would take a month or sometimes several to see a doctor. So that was and a lot of these doctors couldn't have been employed as a doctor in the free world either. So that's the general lay of the land. But in terms of the compassionate release, so there were prisoners there that were determined to be terminally ill by doctors that were working for Department of Corrections. So there was a process referred to as compassionate release, in which any prisoner that was deemed to be terminally ill could apply to be released early, with the theory being that you could die with a little bit of dignity around your family and your friends in a normal environment rather than like in a prison visiting room someplace. So the system took so long often to process those. But sometimes by the time they decided the person already passed away, I mean, that happened a few times where decisions came to the prison a couple of days after somebody had passed away, or sometimes they took so long that by the time they were granted it and they were released, then, the person died like a day or two after that. And they just, it was just so uncaring. It was just, brutal. It was just brutal. So I remember, you said you're here for all the details. So I have a ghastly detail for you. I remember there was a guy named Choco. Which of course is Spanish for chocolate. That wasn't his real name. That was his prison moniker. His last name was Sanchez. I don't remember what his first name was, but point being, I passed him by on the first floor. So it was called the flats, right? It's the bottom floor on the cell gallery. So I passed him by and he was walking very laboriously, very, very slowly. And I could see the sweat coming down lightly from his brow. And I stopped and he was breathing heavy. And I stopped and I asked him, yo, you okay? You gotta, no, I'm not. My chest hurts. And I said, "Yo, you gotta go to sick hall, bro. You gotta go and get medical help." And he said, "Oh, I just came from there. They told me I'm okay. They gave me a couple of Tylenols, but I feel like I'm dying." And he actually was dying. So that night in his cell, he passed away of a heart attack.
And then, I mean, I suppose they didn't say anything in the prison. They just come and pick the bodies up and put another person.
Yeah, and somebody. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think his daughter was notified and came and made arrangements for the body, but that was. I don't think anything ever came of that, though. I mean, that, you know, beyond just being medical, I mean, I feel like somebody should have been locked up for that. Somebody should have faced, professional consequences beyond, in addition to being locked up. And I don't think that ever happened.
Well, people might escape that sort of justice in this life, but God is not mocked, as it is said, for whatever we sow, we reap. And so you mentioned earlier that you had considered suicide at one point. Was it like a one-time thing, or that you have this happening on and off throughout the whole time you were behind bars?
The thought occurred to me the whole, on and off throughout the whole time I was beyond bars. Yeah, because prison is a very, very depressing place.
Is there any mental health available? I'm assuming if the physical health associated, they probably didn't have a psychologist worth a damn either, but
Well, they had some people working there, but again, it was bottom of the barrel, and I felt like the people. I mean, I did go see them a couple times. I never really felt like I was anything other than a number, and they never felt like caring. And you know, but one of the psychologists, told me, and I didn't tell them, hey, I'm thinking of suicide. Okay, just to be clear, I didn't say that because I knew that that would have resulted in bad things. But I did tell them I was struggling with depression and, related symptoms like that. But they told me that, look, they already have their caseloads already way too big and they're not able to deal with anyone other than people that are psychotic or that are, having hallucinations or delusions that they had to pick and choose. And I was just kind of like too low on their totem pole.
you said bad things would have happened if you would have just flat out said you were suicidal. What do you mean? What bad things?
Well, they could have put me in a cell and they could have taken my clothes and put me in the cell and just gave me this see-through paper mache and then had a guard sitting outside of my cell the whole time while I had nothing in the cell. I mean, that's what I mean. You
That's
know,
like
that would
that's like a type of confinement, solitary confinement, maybe, or
yeah, it is a type of solitary confinement, but the main that's considered to be constant observation. I mean, the main thing is, I don't see how taking somebody's clothes and property from them, how that's helpful to someone that's suicidal. If you're already gonna have a staff person sitting outside the cell monitoring them the whole time anyway, I don't think you need to do that in order to make sure that they don't hurt themselves. I mean, I think that that's making a situation go from bad to worse.
right? Because you're taking away some of the basic staples that people need in order to feel human. So it's
Right.
dehumanizing. It's very dehumanizing.
That's right. Yeah.
And the way they're treating suicidal people in prison and jail itself are totally dehumanizing. So that you get to go outside, like in the documentary, I heard you come to mention a few times, like how you missed like the feel of the wind on your face or like the sun and things like that. And from my time in jail, I remember that as well. I wasn't allowed to go outside at all, so there was no wind, no rain, no sun, no moon, and that was the most depressing thing for me. So were you allowed to go outside at all, or how did that work?
So they let you go outside for recreation, some, not all, but like in Elmira, I mean, I feel like they didn't. We didn't get a lot of outside. I wouldn't say there was none at all, but it was more limited. But the other thing in the documentary, though, I mean, when they had a system of maintaining order in a prison called keep lock, which involves sanctions being put on the prisoners if they were found guilty of breaking a prison rule. So they would keep you in the cell 23 so if you were found guilty of breaking a prison rule, then they would apply this to you. And, there were times where my breaking a prison rule was that I was defending myself while somebody was attacking me. And therefore, as the prison saw it, I was fighting. So they would keep me in the cell like 23 hours a day out of the 24. They would send less food. Sometimes the food would be 3 or 4 days old. You could take 2 showers one week, 3 the next, rather than being able to shower daily as the rest of the population. And their idea of giving you the 1 hour a day minimum recreation consisted of putting the prisoners in a small caged area by yourself with maybe a pull-up bar in it if you were lucky. But one time I did went to isolation, a special housing unit. When they put you outside, you couldn't see the outside. I mean, it was totally roofed off, so you couldn't even see the sky.
Well, shit, yeah. You know, you why do you think people, prison guards and things like that, feel the need to step on people who are already broken and pretty much powerless? Why? Because it's not like you really could hurt them. Why? Why do you think?
I think they didn't quite look at us as human beings, some of them. I think some of them were frustrated with their own personal life. Maybe some of them were the kid that was picked on, and we perceived that, some of them were cop wannabes who couldn't quite make it. So this was their chance to just like strike back.
Mhm.
So that was as to the ones that were like that. Look, there also were guards that were professionals, and some of them I enjoyed speaking to here and there, and I even thought that there were some of them that I could have been friends with had I met them under different circumstances. But the thing that bothered and still bothers me the most was, like, none of the professional guards never, or the prison, the people in different authority, with sergeants, captains, lieutenants, superintendent, the hierarchy who's supposed to be there, the oversight. They never like tried to reel anybody in. Like even the good officers, if they saw the other ones, acting the fool or abusing their authority, they would never like step in or say anything or have them pull back anything. They just would let them continue on with that. Not unlike, well, honest cops who see the other people in their profession, whether it's planning evidence or testifying or writing false reports. I mean, they look the other way. So it's kind of a similar dynamic.
Hmm. Okay, so enter the Innocence Project. So
Right.
A lady shows up one day, you're not getting many visitors as we've established, and you come bouncing up there. I'm taking some creative license here. You come bouncing up there and
That's what it was like, though. That what it was like. You're completely on point. Continue on. A little pantomime as well,
right?
huh? Yeah.
So
We don't laugh about this crazy stuff, D. I'm gonna like die. I'm gonna die from it being, we have to do dark humor and release. So please continue on.
absolutely. And so the guard's like, "Yeah, you got a visitor," and you're like, "Yeah, who would be coming to see me?" And for
You're right.
and for a moment,
Right.
the guard asks you, "Do you know this person?" And then you realize that if you don't, then they would cancel the visit. And so you get into you snap to, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I know them." And then so you go over, and this lady introduces herself. She's like, "I'm your new attorney." And she begins to tell you how they ran the DNA, you're gonna get out. What I'm curious about, you went into like a 3.5 hour, I believe it was, like, mental paralysis
Yes.
where you didn't actually believe it, and this woman's trying to tell you, "Yeah, it's for real this time, not for fakes. It's for real." So talk to me about this experience.
Yeah, exactly. So my cell cracks open, and as a general rule, whenever they open your cell, you're supposed to like find out, well, what is this for? So the guard yells down, visit. So I go down, hey, why don't you like double check that? Because, like you said, like who the hell is going to come see me? So they call up there and confirm, yeah, you got a visit. So now I sprint down to my cell. We got like a routine. You have like a little visit shirt because that's the one time you're kind of sort of quasi in public, right? The visiting room where there's the intersection point between the inmates and the so I got this, visit shirt and I'm hurrying up down there and I'm thinking to myself as I'm running, who the hell came to see me? And it's quite a distance actually from my cell to the visiting room. And I got to get there before a certain amount of time before the count happens, because otherwise I'm going to be stuck outside the visiting room for the next 2.5 hours while the visitor waits while they count because they're slow. So I'm running in, and when I finally get there, this lady's waving at me, and I wave back. I'm thinking like she's mistaken. Who's this? And maybe she, I think she thinks I'm someone else, or maybe she remembers me from a different prison. But I asked the girl who came to see me, "Who don't you know?" And like you said, I say yes because I don't want the damn thing to be canceled. So I go over there, and she says, "Hey, hi, I'm Nina Morrison. She's my attorney at the Innocence Project." And and she says the items have been now my ears are alert. I'm looking for like anything to be off or out of the ordinary because that normally spells disaster. And so she says the items have been tested. So right there, what do you mean? They're not supposed to be tested for another month. And she says, yeah, they're actually they were tested. The DA pulled some strings and got the items tested, and the results match the actual perpetrator. And you're going home tomorrow. And I said, no, I'm not. And she said, "Yeah, you are." And I said, "No, I'm not." And she said, "Yeah, you are." And I said, "No, I'm not." And for the next 3.5 hours, I had this mental paralysis. She was literally sitting there holding my hand. My head is spinning. All these thoughts are running through my head. One thought has nothing to do with the next, and none of them have anything to do with me going home. And I'm articulating all this random stuff, and she's not responding. She's just taking it all in, holding my hand. And every now and then she breaks in and says, are you ready to talk about tomorrow? I'm like, no, 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 no. Get away from me. We're not talking about tomorrow. Don't play with me like that. I'm not going home. Okay. So that went on for 3.5 hours. And finally, what made it real, she said, look, visit hours are almost over. There's a ton of work to do between now and tomorrow as far as the media. I need to get your clothing and shoe sizes. We got to get a suit for you. And that made it real. And then I felt better for about 5 minutes. And and then a different concern came in my head, which was I thought that something was going to happen between that day and the next, and that the DA was going to change her mind. And they would do what they always do, which is fight me and win.
Not this time. Not this time.
Thank God, not this time. No, but that was my concern for sure.
So were you in the same prison the whole 16 years?
No,
Okay.
no, I was not. No, I was in Elmira from 1991 and 95. Then I got transferred to Eastern Correctional Facility, which is in Appomattox, New York, so Ulster County, much closer towards the city. But I was only there for 3 weeks. Then they sent me to Fishkill, which was a reception center, and then they sent me back to Elmira for 10 months. And then they sent me to Shawangunk, which is in Dutchess County, and I was there for a year and a half. And that's where I had the incident where the guy tried to kill me with the weight plate, and went to the solitary confinement. And from there, they sent me back to Elmira for a decade. And then I got transferred to Sing Sing for the last 28 days. And then I went to court from there and from court to home.
Sing Sing's like supposed to be amongst the one of the worst places you can go, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yes, it is. Yeah. And the expression, you're going up the river is a reference to Sing Sing because it's located, near the Hudson River.
Yeah, I know about Sing Sing. You a bad son of a bitch if you made it in Sing Sing. Mad cred, yo. Damn. So tell me about the first time you walked out of prison as a free man. Was it in your new pimp suit to talk to the media? Or because
Yeah.
when I got to jail, they just let all us motherfuckers out at midnight on the side of the road, like some roaches scurrying about. There is no sunlight. They just like, okay, go do you. No one's calling an Uber or a taxi or no shit like that. So, but I wasn't complaining. I'm all like, fuck it, I'm free, run. so
Right, right, right.
so tell me about you walking out the wind. You got
Yeah,
all
yeah, yeah.
what's going on?
So I got the suit on, and I step out, and I step outside the courtroom, and I remember the sky was blue. There wasn't a cloud to be found. I felt the sun and air on my face, and everybody was clapping, from the Innocence Project and the students from Cardozo Law School, which provided interns to them. And then I stepped over to the press conference, and my first, there's all these cameras and everything, and when it was my turn to speak, the first thing I said was, "Is this really happening?" Like, it was a legitimate question in my head. Like, okay, I think I've finally gone ahead and done it. I think I've managed to lose my mind here, but and it was disorienting as they were asking questions. But then I said, "Look, I'd like you to do it like I saw on TV. Just mention your name and what station, like from seeing White House press conference." And so that kind of made sense of it a little bit. So yeah, I gave this off the cuff presentation where everything I ever wanted to say in 16 years, it came out. And so I held everybody there for 2.5 hours.
Hell yeah, man. So so now you're out. Just can you tell me anything about the after effects? So now like you're out. I'm sure
So we had a nice lunch at Italian food place. I had mussels fra diavolo with a side of baked ziti. And the fact, and there was a media person there. So when I'm eating, there was a thing with the ice cream, and I'm like this, and they're taking pictures for a half a second. I kind of sort of felt like, I'm a famous person with a paparazzi. But then we went to my aunt's house, and that's when kind of the rubber hit the road. And I was remember just sitting at a table, and my mother was there, and my aunt was there, and other family member came over that hadn't been present. And they were just drinking coffee, talking about everything. But I remember just feeling isolated and unable to relate to people and just feeling out of place. So I went outside and sat down outside. My uncle had like a bench, and I just wanted to sit outside while it was dark because they would always make you go inside in the prison yard when it would get dark.
y'all heard how he remembers exactly what he had to eat that first time after he got out of jail down to the detail. That first meal goes a long fucking way. I heard you, brother. I heard you.
Right.
We know when we're out here in the streets, we can eat what we want. You can walk over, get a Sprite out of the refrigerator, glass champagne. You can have Italian, you can have Mexican, you can have Ethiopian food. Whatever the fuck you want, you can go and get, but not so when you're in jail. You eat what they give you to eat, and you've already heard how terrible it is. Those basic freedoms that we just have every day are stripped from you. It was that way in basic military training when I was there, was that way when I was locked up in jail. Speak to me about the emotions of, trying to date. So much time has passed. You went in when you were like, a
17.
teenager,
Yeah.
now you're a grown ass man, but you don't have real world experiences. So did you feel like you were starting back over from 17 or, you know,
Yes. Yeah, I did. I felt I was released when I was 32, but as you correctly point out, I did feel like I was still 17 because that was the year that was how old I was when I was last free. But dating was difficult because I really didn't understand approach dynamics or how to determine if somebody is, attracted or in you or interested in you versus they're just being friendly because they're just being friendly or it has to do more with the story. So it was very hard. Plus my background, what do you, how do you, how do you, how did you get into doing this advocacy work? So it's a short three questions. It's a short three questions before my background gets on the story. And then I, then from there, it's like, I just went from being a candidate or somebody possible to, I'm someone to feel sorry for, but Elvis has just left the building, like I'm not a possibility anymore. I'm just the sum total of what happened to me. And that, that would frustrate me. That would make me feel bad, and people have said, well, if they're like that, that's really it's their loss. It's not yours. They're not the right person for you. Yeah. Okay. And on one level that makes sense. But at the end of the day, it's still, it's still me that's missing out. I'm still the one that's thinking about, well, what if? So it's not a good feeling. So in that aspect of it, I feel like, in many ways, I'm still paying for the wrongful conviction. But the other thing too, the stigmatic level, you were in prison for 16 years wrongfully, yes, but you were there for 16 years. How much of that rubbed off on you? Is it safe to be alone someplace with you?
and people carry a negative connotation towards those of us who have been arrested, which I know not everybody runs around trying to act like a Christian or nothing like that, but you know, be it, Jesus did tell us to, to visit and to care for people who are behind prison walls and the stuff like that. And the Lord would not judge somebody, you know, on that level, in a negative way like that in order to view somebody who's been incarcerated as though they're less than. This is a challenge, I believe, to the world to love people. And I think God challenges the world to love people through the problems we've had. People like me who've been strung out on every kind of damn drug and have been homeless and been in jail and stuff like that. People didn't want to be my friend, because of those things. I'm like, you can't go to church on Sunday and be like, hallelujah. But then when you're actually presented with an opportunity to show love to somebody who fucking needs it, somebody who's been to jail for 16 years, then you gonna run. you know, it's easy to love somebody who you think is the upper part of society or like, your fucking uppity ass or whatever. But the true love is given when people need it. So yeah, you're gonna have some mental effects and some emotional effects, but it's a grand opportunity. The people who you were trying to be around, I agree with whoever told you that they weren't the person for you and they weren't strong enough or they didn't have enough love, for you. You need somebody better. And that's how I began to look at it after being constantly rejected, being employers or people I was trying to date. I was like, you know what? Eventually, when God is ready, the right person who's strong enough will come along and they won't care about my background. Did you ever find anybody like that?
That didn't care about my background? Yeah, I did. I did find somebody that didn't care about my background, but then after, but then that ended up not working out on other grounds.
Okay, I'm here for there not working out on other grounds because there's all kinds of reasons why a relationship may not work out, but it shouldn't be automatically disqualified the chance based on what had happened, back then. So
Right,
so
right,
I'm
right.
cool with that. I can accept that.
Mhm.
So okay, so you started your nonprofit, and the website for that is gonna go into the show notes, but can you tell us about your nonprofit? So Jeffrey did get some amount of settlement money. You could tell us how much or not. Some of it's available on the internet, but from what I read or came across, I think you may have sued 3 different cities or something like that, or three.
Well, I'll explain. Yeah, yeah, I'll explain. So in New York State, you can seek compensation under state law, and I did, and they settled with me for 1.85. And then you're also able to bring a federal civil rights lawsuit. And the difference between that and the state is that the theory under the state law, that's like a no fault. So you don't have to prove that there was misconduct. You just have to prove that you were in prison wrongfully. And that's also like what the state's secondary responsibility is and everything. And then in the federal, you have to prove that there was a malicious violation of a constitutional right and that is what led to your wrongful imprisonment. So I did bring a federal civil rights lawsuit. The defendants were Westchester County because it was their medical examiner who committed fraud. They settled with me for 6.5. Another defendant was Westchester County Legal Aid, so I'm not allowed to disclose that amount, so I won't. But I also another a third defendant was Peekskill, so they settled for 5.3. And I went to trial with Putnam County, that was their polygraphist, and I the purpose of the trial was to determine if they would have to pay the higher figure, which was 10, or the lower figure, which is 6.5. So they were afraid I was going to bankrupt them. So they didn't want to just have it all up for grabs. They wanted me to guarantee them a ceiling, which I was willing to do in exchange for a floor. And so I won. So they had to pay the higher amount. But remember, I keep saying paid, not not received. Okay. So you every time you settle, you have to pay the legal expenses associated with that. And then the lawyers take a third. So in reality, you keep 55 to 60% of what they pay.
Okay. And he's talking about like when he says 1.5, 6.5, he means like million.
Yes, to
So then,
clarify.
so then you were able to use this to start your nonprofit.
Yep. I use some of it to start the nonprofit. So up until that point, I had been an individual advocate. So I was speaking across the country. I was doing media interviews, basically trading privacy for increased awareness. I was a columnist for a weekly paper, and I was also regularly meeting with elected officials. So I did that for about 5 years, but I wanted to get involved in freeing people because up to that point, I was only able to do the policy and educational part and kind of nibble on the edges in terms of freeing people. So it will be limited to that, like lawyers representing other innocent people trying to exonerate them. Once you come to the court, so if the judge recognizes you, there'll be that visual, and maybe they'll say, "Well, wait, Deskovic's here. That means you're supporting this case. Let me pay attention to this one just a little bit more." Or grassroots tactics, help get other people to the courtroom and maybe even use my name in a press release to get additional media. So that was done too. But all of that is just, and I wrote about some of the cases also in my capacity as a columnist, but that was all kind of like nibbling on the edges. I wanted to be more directly involved. So I used some of the money to start the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which would continue all that work, but would have the exonerative component. So ultimately, we were able to get 11 people home that were wrongfully imprisoned. We were able to help pass 3 laws, wrongful conviction prevention. So specifically, videotaping interrogations, better procedures in terms of lineups, DNA database expansion. Then there was a statewide coalition called It Could Happen to You, which was started. And so my foundation was joined that coalition, and I became an advisory board member of it. And we helped pass 6 additional laws. So our signature piece of legislation was the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct, so independent oversight board for prosecutors. So the first one in the country. So we did that, and we helped pass discovery reform, which pertains to sharing information automatically between the defense and the prosecution, instead of them turning over evidence on the eve of a hearing, on the eve of a trial, where it's not enough time to work with it. So that was historically. In terms of now, I got, well, first of all, let me say that to be a more effective advocate, I continued with my education. So I had gotten the GED and associates in prison in a year towards the bachelor's. Then they cut the funding of college education for prisoners. So when I was released, I got a scholarship for Mercy College to finish the bachelor's degree. I have a master's degree from John Jay College. My thesis is on wrongful conviction causes and reform. And I did that both of those because I thought that would make me more effective advocate. And at some point, I got tired of sitting in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table and represent some of the clients and make some of the arguments. So I went to law school. I became an attorney. So at present, we have 11 cases that are active. I've entered some of those cases as co-counsel. I'm the lead attorney in a couple, and the others I'm not involved in at all, other than just to occasionally check in with the lawyers to get an update. In terms of policy stuff, we're working on some pieces of legislation in New York now. So there's a Youth Interrogation Act, which is a law which, if passed, would require anyone 16 or 17 has to speak to a lawyer to have their rights explained to them before they can waive their rights and speak to the police, recognizing that most people that age don't understand their rights. There's a police deception bill, which would prohibit the cops from lying. And another thing is that when the law was passed mandating that the police videotape interrogations, eh, it came out like Swiss cheese. They made exceptions for sex offenses, drug cases, and homicides. And that's really the cases where we need it the most.
Right.
So trying to get rid of those. Right, right. There's a bill challenging Wrongful Convictions Act, which would provide attorneys for people. So that's a bill. And then some parole reform stuff that would require the parole board to not, they would have to cite an additional reason beyond nature of the crime in denying parole. And there's an elder parole bill, which is a proposition. If you're 55 and have served 15 years, you would be guaranteed a parole board appearance, not a release. So we're doing that in New York, but in nearby Pennsylvania. So the foundation, again, working through the Pennsylvania chapter, if it could happen to you, we're working on exonerate compensation. So Pennsylvania doesn't compensate people. So we're working on that. And in California, we're trying to bring the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct out there. So we're very involved in policy work and in working on cases.
And didn't you have to do with the, like, I think, like, capital punishment being removed from a state?
Yes. Yes, that's right. Yes. So, yes. So I worked in collaboration with New Yorkers Against the Death Penalty. That was in 2006, 2007. There was a serious movement in trying to reinstate capital punishment after the court had struck it down as being unconstitutional. So I happened to have been exonerated at the right moment. So there were 3 different state troopers that had been killed. And so that was like the force that the pro-death penalty people were using. But I was the moral counterweight. I was the innocence argument. So we fought off attempts to reinstating it. But then in 2009, I worked in collaboration with a Connecticut network against the death penalty. And we were able to legislatively abolish the death penalty. So Connecticut is a border state to New York, and they would like parachute me into certain battleground districts to do presentations and do media interviews. And a couple of times I went to the Connecticut state legislature and told them a thing or two. And ultimately we got rid of the death. Ultimately we got rid of the death penalty legislatively in Connecticut. And I'm really happy about those accomplishments because, obviously the death penalty, amongst the host of other objections, obviously the death penalty definitely risks the execution of innocent people for sure.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you were able to live long enough to be exonerated. So,
Right. Well, that's right. We'll see if there had been a death penalty and I was a couple years older. The elements for what make a case a capital case as opposed to not were present. I mean, it's if you're convicted of a rape along with that murder, and that's often an aggravating circumstance. If there's community outrage, that's an aggravating circumstance. So both of those elements were present. My appeals ran out in 2011. I wasn't exonerated to 5 years after that. So I wouldn't have been alive to have been exonerated if there was a death penalty. So I think about that issue a lot.
you think about a lot, but not only you think, you do. And so
Right.
that's what I'm here for. So y'all, the website is the Deskovic Foundation.org. There's a Patreon that you can link through there too if you want to support that way. I donated to your cause before we got on this interview.
I saw that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Every bit helps.
No problem. Yes, a little bit goes a long way. So I encourage everyone else in the world to check out his website. And if you feel so inclined to donate as well, as we proved through this interview, Jeffrey's been involved with tangible work that has had to do with setting wrongfully convicted people free, repealing hurtful laws and things like that. And his work continues today. But if there's any other kind of way that I can assist your foundation or the work that you're doing, then send me a message and let me know, because having been through the ringer of the quote unquote justice system that we have here in the United States ourselves, I understand what a fucking content really is. And so whatever I can do, just think about it and let me know. So anything you want to say as we begin to wrap up here? Any, closing words?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I mean, look, in terms of if anyone's listening that could help out. So if you have your own podcast or blog talk radio, you write a blog or whatever, I mean, have message will travel metaphorically. So I don't refuse to go on any show, no matter how small the audience. You never know who's listening that could help out in one kind of way or another. If you work at a corporation and they do corporate philanthropy, put a bug in their ear to consider us. That would certainly be helpful. If you know people that are more traditional media, suggest they do an interview. We're always looking for donors, whether it's large, intermediate, even small. On the Patreon website, my crazy dream is, what if there were 25,000 people that were willing to part with $3 to $5 a month on a recurring monthly basis? I mean, that would give us a lot of money, and we could work on freeing even more people, help pass even more laws that aimed at preventing this. So those are all ways people can help. But think about careers in this, whether that's being an attorney, an investigator, a paralegal, within the context of a nonprofit organization doing this work. There's room on public relations, writing grants, fundraising. On the reintegrative side, there's careers in social work or in psychology, in terms of helping people reintegrate. So many ways. On the documentary level, that some documentaries or even a series, I mean, that's brought attention to some cases, and that's helped facilitate people getting justice. So lots of ways to get involved. Don't you dare try to get out of jury duty. All right. When that happens, we just get terrible people in the jury that are really not going to scrutinize the prosecution's case. So that's very important. Vote. Okay. Vote. Did I mention vote? It's important to insert wrongful conviction and criminal justice reform issues into elections so that the issue gets furthered, whether the candidate you want to win ultimately wins or not. I do believe it makes, I do agree with John McCain that elections have consequences. So it is important who we get in office. So we should vote for people that are for justice reform. So I want to mention those things. And I want to say that this could happen to anybody. I mean, yes, it more often happens to minorities, no question about it. 7 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted of murder if you're Black, or you're 3.5 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted of a sex offense if you're Black. So no question that there's race in it. But beyond that, it does cut across race. I mean, I'm pretty much as white as you can get, and it and it happened to me. So it does cross that. People think it could never happen to me, but yeah, it could actually happen to you. I didn't have a record. So I was actually on my way to school when I was initially intercepted by the police. So yes, it happened to me, and it could happen to you. But I think I want to close out just on an inspirational, instructive note, which is, I have my generic formula, and this could apply whether it's wrongful conviction, whether it's you're trying to overcome surviving a family member being killed, whether you've been sexually trafficked, whether you've been sexually assaulted, if you've suffered discrimination, if you've faced racism, or anything else you want to throw in there. So my generic formula, and I've seen people in these different walks of life do this, by the way, something similar to what I've done. So you want to have a goal, you want to have a realistic plan. You should be able to look at it 3 or 4 ways and say to yourself, yeah, I could see how that would work. Because who wants to carry out a plan that you don't think could be successful? Be flexible. Remember, the the goal is the goal. The plan's not the goal. So if a different door opens for you and it moving you towards that goal, don't be afraid to walk through. Roll up your sleeves, do a lot of hard work. I believe you have to put yourself in position for a miracle to happen rather than just thinking you can do nothing and it's going to drop into your lap. Just leave it all out. Never give up, man. Leave it all to bring in a sports analogy. Leave it all out on the field. No excuses. Maybe there's reasons why something is more difficult, why it's more of a challenge, but no reason why you can't accomplish it. You just have to want it enough. You have to work for it enough. And then when you've made it, when you've crossed over, you got to reach back for people in that same position that you were in. You'll find it meaningful, healing, cathartic. It'll help make the world better. And it'll allow you to take a silver lining. It'll make your suffering count for something.
Well, damn, that was very beautifully stated. And meaningful and heartfelt. He meant every syllable of what he just said, y'all. So the social media and everything will go in the show notes. They are on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. And I encourage everyone to check it out. And y'all just be prayerful and be mindful of how you're dealing with people from all walks of life. Thank you, Jeffrey, for coming on the show. Thank you for that beautiful closing. And I will be talking to you soon.
Looking forward. Thanks a lot, D.
Thank you all so much for taking time to listen to the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus podcast. It really means everything to me. Look, if you love the show, you can find more information and resources at sexdrugsandjesus.com or wherever you listen to your podcast. Feel free to reach out to me directly at thevannon@sexdrugsandjesus.com and on Twitter and Facebook as well. My name is Devannon, and it's been wonderful being your host today. And just remember that everything is going to be all right.